Last week, I took a look at GPU performance in Battlefield 6, and after having tested 43 graphics cards, one of the most frequent requests I saw from you guys was to do it all again, but this time a CPU benchmark was in order. So I cancelled the weekend, spent the last 4 days doing just that. So today we have 33 CPU results to go over, covering 3 quality presets. But before we get to that, today's video is brought to you by Insta360 and the new Link 2 4K webcam now available in white. This unit features a high-performance half-inch sensor delivering crisp 4K video with an AI-powered audio algorithm providing great audio quality via the built-in microphone. Building on the original Link, the Link 2 also has, you guessed it, AI tracking for individuals and groups, as well as gesture control and auto framing. It now also offers modes such as customizable backgrounds and effects, so if you, like me, are sick of the hardware box studio, you can dip down to your local coffee shop and just hang out and relax. The 4K 30 FPS camera offers excellent video quality even in low light situations, such as this. Nice and dark now. I think I look pretty good on the screen, still nice and clear. So really, for a cost-effective solution, the image quality is amazing and can probably really only be bested by something like a professional digital SLR. The Link 2 is also equipped with a gimbal, making it perfect for demos and presentations. Balin, get out of my presentation. It also pairs perfectly with the new Wave speakerphone. So for more information, please click the link in the video description. Okay, so there is a lot of data to go over, but before we do, let me explain how we went about getting it. Now, the single player portion of the game is suitable for measuring GPU performance. The margins seen there between the various GPUs should translate roughly to what you'll see in the various multiplayer modes. But when it comes to CPU performance, the single player portion is almost like an entirely different game. But we've also seen when testing the open beta just how difficult it is to measure multiplayer CPU performance accurately, at least for comparison purposes. This is because multiplayer matches are dynamic, they're highly variable, and that means what might happen in one match won't necessarily happen in another. Different things may end up getting destroyed, players will occupy different areas of the map, and all of this can heavily influence performance. Solving this issue for head-to-head comparisons, we resorted to testing 2 CPUs at the exact same time, as in, they were tested in the same match, doing the same thing, and this required 2 people and a pair of RTX 5090 graphics cards. But unfortunately, what I wasn't able to do was get 33 RTX 5090s, 33 people, and 33 test systems for a 33 CPU benchmark. So this makes testing the multiplayer portion of the game accurately a very difficult, if not impossible task. But thankfully there is a solution, and it's a pretty good one. Using the Portal Builder, I was able to create a bot match, which was surprisingly similar to the real deal when it comes to CPU performance. And the good thing about bots is that they're highly predictable, and as a result we ended up with the same outcome every single time, each team fighting in the same street for a highly repeatable benchmark. I'm also able to create a scenario where the bots can eliminate each other, but not me. So kind of like God mode. And this means unlike the normal game mode where countless benchmark passes end up being invalidated because we were killed by other players, this isn't possible in our custom benchmark, so therefore we waste a lot less time and it allows us to test many more CPUs for you. It also allows me to make a more detailed test. I'm allowed to walk from one end of the street to the other right through all of the action for the benchmark pass because, again, the bots aren't able to kill me. I'm also then able to reset the match and do all the testing again 2 more times for a 3-run average. It's a highly reliable benchmark process that provides accurate data. Finally, for the map, I went with Empire State as this was one of the most CPU demanding maps we tested from the open beta. And I found when testing less demanding maps, such as Liberation Peak, that the 9800X3D was over 40% faster than the 14900K, but on Empire State that margin was halved. Of course, all testing has been conducted at 1080p using an RTX 5090, as we're interested in CPU performance for this testing, and I've tested using the low, medium, and overkill presets. All CPUs have been tested with the memory profile loaded, while everything else has been left stock. So no overclocking, PBO isn't enabled for the Ryzen CPUs, nor are any Intel one-click overclocking options like 200S boost. So again, just stock performance. Okay, let's get into the data. Starting with the Overkill preset, we see that the AM5 X3D CPUs are the king of the hill, averaging almost 200 FPS in this test. The 9800X3D was the fastest of the lot with 192 FPS, and please note my 7800X3D wasn't available as I've lent it out to another reviewer to help them out. But generally that CPU is only around 10% slower than the 9800X3D, so it should be good for at least 170 FPS on average, which would make it 13% faster than the 7600X3D, and that makes sense. Speaking of the 7600X3D, it was good for 151 FPS, making it slightly faster than the 9950X. Then we have the 9700X and 285K at just over 140 FPS. We actually end up having half a dozen CPUs in the 140 FPS range, and this also includes the 265K, 14900K, and 7700X. Then in the 130 FPS range, we find the 245K, 7600X, 9600X, 14600K, 12900K, and 14700K. Also, everyone's favourite, the 5800X3D, is struggling just a little bit here relative to the newer stuff, but still with 124 FPS on average, it did very well, roughly matching the 7500F, though with weaker 1% lows. The standard Zen 3 parts, like the 5800X, were only able to just crack the 100 FPS barrier, matching CPUs such as the 12400F, 11900K, and the poorly named 8400F. The 5800X was quite a bit faster than the 10900K, 17% in this example, while the 10600K matched the Ryzen 5 3600. Then towards the bottom of our graph, we find the quad-core 12100F, and then the Zen Plus processors. Moving down to the high preset slightly reduces CPU load. For example, when using the Overkill preset, the 9800X3D was 34% faster than the 285K. And while you might have expected that margin to increase as we reduce the quality preset, the opposite happens, and now the 9800X3D is 27% faster. Still quite a big margin, it has to be said, but it has come down. The majority of the CPUs tested delivered between 138 and 159 FPS, which is about a 15% range, and towards the top of this range, you'll find parts such as the 7600X3D, 9950X, 285K, 9700X, 14900K, and 7700X. The 265K, 9600X, 7600X, and 14600K were all tightly grouped, while the first CPUs to fall away from this pack include the 12600K and 12400F. The Ryzen 5 8400F was the worst of the modern processors, only matching the 5800X and 11900K, so a poor result there. The 10900K was closer to the 5800X this time, while the 10600K matched the 5600. Then once again, the slower CPUs tested included the 12100F, 2700X, and 2600. Finally, we have the low preset, and this didn't do much to improve the performance of the Zen 5 3D V-Cache parts, but it did help some of the slower CPUs close in. The 9800X3D was still 27% faster than the 285K, but now we find a wide range of CPUs delivering between 158 and 163 FPS, so a pretty tight grouping for 10 processors, which saw no more than a 3% performance deviation. This means the Ryzen 5 7600X, for example, was comparable to the 285K, while interestingly the 7600X 3D was barely any faster, improving the 1% lows by just 10%. Then when compared to the Overkill preset, we see with the low preset that boosts performance of parts like the 12600K by 14%, not massive, but every bit does help with these older parts. But where you'll really notice the performance uplift using the low preset is with the older, low-end processors, like the Core i3 12100F for example. This saw a massive 49% performance improvement for the 1% lows and a 36% boost to the average frame rate. So if you do have an older or slower CPU, make sure you're using the low preset, as this can help boost performance dramatically, and it's not necessarily a result of your GPU's workload being reduced. Now, just to head off topic for a moment to address some confusion with the previous GPU testing, where we found that 8GB GPUs were significantly slower than their 16GB versions. Apparently other benchmarks didn't report this, showing 8 and 16GB versions of a product such as the RTX 5060 Ti to deliver comparable performance. And this really just highlights how difficult VRAM testing is, and how problems that arise through a lack of VRAM don't always present in a quick benchmark pass. This is why, for example, I play the game quite extensively using the 16GB version of a product such as the RTX 5060 Ti, and then I do so again using the 8GB version. I replayed Mission 3 multiple times using each, and this gives us a really good idea of how they actually play the game. For example, if we load up the start of the third mission using both the 8 and 16GB versions of the 5060 Ti with the Overkill preset using quality upscaling at 1440p, we see that for the first few minutes of gameplay, there is no real differences between the two. The performance is very similar. But if we fast forward just a little bit into the mission, you see a situation where the 8GB model is starting to fall behind. It's really not by much at first, but if you continue to play, the situation only gets worse. After about 15 minutes of gameplay, we ran into this. The game's now using over 10GB of VRAM, and as a result, the 8GB model is in real trouble. And two things are happening by this point. We've been running the game for quite some time now, and that's allowed us to fully load up the VRAM, but we've also hit one of the more demanding sections of the game, which requires more VRAM. As a result, the 16GB 5060 Ti ends up delivering over 80% greater performance, which is more than we actually saw in the previous video, but when you run out of VRAM, the performance becomes rather inconsistent. But the crucial takeaway here being that we're able to enjoy playable performance with the 16GB model, while the 8GB card is a laggy mess. But also, these VRAM issues really only apply for the single-player campaign, as it's here that you're likely going to want to crank up the visuals for the best possible experience, make it more immersive, let's say. But the opposite will be true for most gamers when it comes to the multiplayer portion of the game, which is why I didn't make a big deal, or really any deal, out of the VRAM issue for this particular title. Not only that, but if we drop down to the high preset, the game still looks great, and for the most part the 8GB GPUs do work well, at least when using upscaling. Then once we drop down to the medium or even the low preset, you don't need upscaling to avoid performance-related issues with an 8GB GPU, and it's these lower quality settings that most multiplayer gamers will be looking to use, as it gives you a competitive edge, it's easier to spot enemies and all that sort of stuff, and it also boosts performance. So there you have it. Despite being a very CPU demanding game, most modern CPUs will allow you to play at high frame rates. The Ryzen 5 7400F, for example, is a very modest CPU, and using the high preset, we saw an average of 141 FPS in our test. It's also worth noting that at times we saw frame rates considerably higher than what we're reporting here. For example, if I ran away from the action, the frame rate could increase by as much as 50%. Moreover, frame rates do vary quite significantly from one map to another, so be aware of that. The point is, all of this CPU testing was conducted under the exact same conditions. So if your 265K, for example, is typically more up around 200 FPS, that doesn't mean our 265K was underperforming or that yours is particularly fast. Rather, it just means you're not looking exclusively at performance in the most demanding section of a given match, which is what our entire test does. Lastly, I should also just note that I'm well aware of the user config file trick, which has been something you could do with previous Battlefield titles. Essentially, you can create a file that tells the game how many physical cores your CPU has available and the maximum number of threads, and doing so can improve performance, but I tried this on my 9800X3D test system and saw no performance improvement. But if you want to try this for yourself, there are countless guides online, so I won't rehash all that information here, just go look it up. It's pretty simple to do, so yeah, check it out if you're interested. Anyway, the good news is if you have a modern AMD or Intel CPU, performance in Battlefield 6 is going to be excellent. Obviously, the AMD AM5 3D V-Cache CPUs are the best of the best right now, and while they are a good bit faster than everything else, they're far from a requirement. CPUs such as the 8500K, 14900K, and 9700X, for example, still deliver a top-tier experience. And that is going to do it for this video. If you liked it, you know what to do. Subscribe. We may have more Battlefield 6 content coming up in the near future. Can't guarantee that, but of course there will be plenty of other content. So again, make sure you subscribe for that. We also have the join button or Patreon if you want to become a Harbour Unboxed member, get access to some exclusive stuff such as our Discord server, behind the scenes content. There's also Q&A stuff there. So yeah, check it out if you're interested, but if not, that's perfectly fine. And I would like to thank you for watching this video. I'm your host, Steve. See you next time.